Room 592 every Monday to Friday from 19 hours 30 to 20 hours 30 with Dr. Mahadeo and senior journalist of Kaieteur News, Leonard Gildarie. Room 592 on Kaieteur Radio, the radio with a difference.
COVID-19 tips sponsored by Dex Soap. 1. Practice social distancing. 2. Wear your mask when leaving the house. 3. Wash your hands regularly for 20 seconds using our Dex soap. 4. Cover your nose and mouth with a disposable tissue or flex elbow when you cough or sneeze. Choose Dex soap for that extra cleanliness. Dex soap is affordable and available nationwide.
Obey your thirst for the truth.
Because you're worth knowing the truth.
Quench it with Kaieteur Radio.
Demerara and Essequibo 99.1 FM.
Verbies 99.5 FM.
It is now 19 hours 33 in Guyana. We do apologize for the late start of this evening's edition of Room 592, where we unleash the truth with none other than Dr. Mahadeo and his loyal co-host, senior journalist of Kaieteur News, Mr. Leonard Gildarie. Once again, one is decked in white, the other in red. This evening, the special guest appearance, a fan favorite, no stranger to Room 592, Mr. Freddie Kissoon. Good evening, gentlemen.
Kevin, and it was all Leonard's fault. He was late, right? And that's how he started. Ladies and gentlemen, let me apologize. This time it is all my fault. I've said it, Leonard. It is all my fault. My apologies for our 2 minutes late start, ladies and gentlemen, as I welcome you all and welcome our guest, Mr. Freddie Kissoon, to Room 592, where we unleash the truth. It is serious times, ladies and gentlemen. We all know the backdrop of where we are, why we are here 136 days after elections without any results. We do know that today has been a very long day with the court case going on and on and on, and we would have seen the legal luminaries would have expressed themselves this time once again in front of the general public. We would have seen how impressive or not their arguments were. And ladies and gentlemen, just before I allow ourselves to listen to the wise counsel on analysis of Mr. Freddie Kissoon, I just want to share this with you. This analogy, ladies and gentlemen, that, this court case is reminiscent of a position where imagine a thief that has been caught red-handed in the act of stealing. But this thief argues that because the act of stealing is incomplete, it is not illegal. Number two, the thief wants you to accept that because you saw him stealing and because it is not illegal, you must allow it. And number three, The current position is that the thief wants you to go back to sleep so that they could complete the act of stealing. And then when you wake, it's up to you to catch them or to find them or not. That's a perfect analogy of where we are, ladies and gentlemen. But stealing is stealing. Intent. In crime, they often look at the intent, the motive for criminal action, ladies and gentlemen. Tonight is a sad night for Guyana as we continue to regurgitate verbiage in our desires to prolong this election saga that we have here. Mr. Kissoon, welcome, sir. Welcome to Room 592 once again.
Thanks for the invitation. I'm always here.
Thank you, Freddie. And my co-host, Mr. Leonard Gildarie, sir, it has been a long day, and I know at one stage both you and I and the Kaieteur radio crew were worried about whether the court case would go on and we wouldn't get to have this discussion here tonight, but thankfully we are on our way, sir. Your thoughts of today's proceedings?
Very much of 5 hours or a little more than that, and of course a lot of people they were finding plenty things humorous, people falling asleep, all kinds of things happening. But it is what it is in the courts, and so our good Chief Justice is ready to come out with a ruling on Monday at 4. She said originally it would have been sometime on Sunday with a ruling, but she said that it was so a lot of nice arguments coming out today, and that's my words, that she's decided to push it back until Monday. 5 hours, I think there's a lot to digest there. I can understand the task that she has at hand.
Great. And so let us get into our discussion with Mr. Kissoon then. Mr. Kissoon, if you don't mind, without getting into the more analysis that I would want us to get into, your thoughts, if you might have listened to any of the court arguments today, so your knee-jerk reaction.
Well, it's a pattern. The court case was perceived by the Americans to be the ultimate in absurdity, and I believe that court case is what brought on the sanctions, because the court case is in fundamental ignorance, deliberate fundamental ignorance of what the Guyana's highest court of appeal has adumbrated. So, if you're going to pursue an agenda of fundamental ignorance in each finality of legality, then it's going to be no ending. So I think what the Americans said is that the CCJ has ruled, so they were waiting for the declaration by GCOM, and then came this court case, which is a total denial of the finality. Now, if you're going to go on doing that, and that is going to happen when this case reaches the CCJ, I'm hoping it doesn't. I'm hoping on Tuesday Pradeep Singh does the decent thing, call in the GCOM commission. If the PNC guys don't come, then the next day continue and make the declaration. But if this thing goes to the CCJ, what those people are going to do is what they have done with the CCJ. They're going to take a line and in depraved manner say this is what the line means. Therefore, we want to test this in court, and say they're going to go on doing that. I don't believe they are going to bow to the declaration, because Granger has given it away. He said that he will adhere to GCOM's declaration if it's within the law. Now, if you look at Granger's deploiement or his approach to Guyanese jurisprudence, he doesn't accept definitive conclusions of court cases. When the Chief Justice had ruled, he said that is our interpretation. And then he did something that caused the diplomatic community in this country, every one of them, Mexico, Argentina, India, they were all there in addition to the powerful Western countries. He called them at a meeting and said to them, the chairman of the Caribbean Court of Justice has ruled that I, as president, can escape the Carter article in the Constitution where the opposition has to nominate the chairman. And I can come up with a list of my own nominees and choose it. I'm telling you, I live all my life in Guyana, and I've seen, and I've studied Caribbean politics. I've seen Caribbean leaders make really asinine mistakes, but not Forbes Burnham. For all his autocratic mentality, Burnham would never have done such a stupid thing. And I would think that in the history of the Caribbean, no president or prime minister has drifted from one absurdity to another the way David Granger has. And in my conclusion, I think he's the most pathetic leader the British West Indies has produced. I know there were mediocre people in Antigua, Walters in Antigua, there was Gary in Grenada, Bernard St. John in Barbados, Chambers in Trinidad. They were basically self-effacing, mediocre leaders. I think Donald Ramotar didn't show any vision or any initiative. But you have to look hard within the community of the English-speaking Caribbean to find someone whose banality and intellectual vacuousness exceed David Granger. I think Granger has been the most embarrassment in the corridors of power in the post-colonial Caribbean.
Right. Well said, sir. And ladies and gentlemen, that is indeed an excellent analysis. And to borrow Mr. Kissoon's phrase, it is now the ultimate in absurdity. Mr. Kissoon, your view that you expressed 2 weeks ago, that there is your opinion that Granger will not step down even if he were to lose. I don't know if I've reflected that correctly, sir.
This I think is the game plan. They're not going to accept the GCOM declaration, and they're going to do that by saying this case is going to the Court of Appeal. Let's say what the Court of Appeal said. This is the game plan. They are going to stay in there until some important person in the world, it could be the UN General Secretary, it could be Jesse Jackson, it could be Obama or somebody, or it could be some very powerful
But what are your thoughts of this? So they have recently started bandy around that November United States election date. They are banding that around under the premise that a change in government in the U.S. will see a softening of the position in Guyana.
No, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen for one reason. There is the U.S. government, no matter how powerful the Chinese government is, the Russian government, international relations, it doesn't operate the way the ignorant people in the PNC sees it. Governments do not act on their own. They are alliance, every government a part of an alliance. China, North Korea, etc. The Russians have their alliances too. A government will not make such a major decision without seeking the views of their alliance partners. And the EU and CARICOM will be the two sectors that the Biden presidency will consult and say, look, what is your position on Guyana? And Biden, when he comes into power, he's going to try to mend a lot of fences that Trump has broken. So he's not going to unilaterally adopt a position on rigged elections in Guyana. He is not going to do that. You got to understand, these PNC people are very, very ignorant of the realities of the world. And one shuddered to think if they had won this election, what would have happened to Guyana's image. You have a black caucus of 59 black legislators in the U.S. House of Representatives. And they honestly believe that they could go to these people and tell these people a rich Indian aristocracy hired an American firm, rigged the election to keep out a black government. They are so ignorant in the age of the internet that those people are going to say, that is what happened. Do you know not one black congresswoman or one black congressman has endorsed the election, quote unquote, victory of Granger? Not one country in the Commonwealth. Now, those are things if Biden wins, and they hope Biden is stupid. Well, they think more everybody's stupid. It isn't going to happen. This is what I think they're hoping for, and this is what I think may happen halfway, but it will collapse. They are going to stay in power despite a declaration by GCOM. And they're going to wait for someone. It could be President Biden himself. It could be the UN General Secretary. It could be Michelle Obama. To say, look, bring these people to the table and let's talk. And in the discussion, the PNC is going to ask for an interim government until there's another election and until there's a change in the Constitution. I don't know if the PPP is going to accept that, but let us say the PPP accept that. Down the road, there's going to be collapse. There's going to be collapse for two reasons. In no country in the world that has a plural system like Guyana, Belgium, Switzerland, Fiji, the Constitution guarantees a electoral performer a substantial position in power. You get that position based on your return in the elections. Now, what the PNC is hoping to insert in the new Constitution is a permanent role, a substantial permanent role in power, that this thing must reflect, the ethnic reality. That isn't going to work, and the constitutional framers aren't going to accept that. You will get a share in government based on the electoral returns. Now, if the PNC gets 15% in the next election, they cannot hope to get 50% of the government. And that is what they are hoping to achieve, a kind of 45-50% government in a new constitution. No new constitution is going to embody the permanency of power without taking into consideration electoral performance, electoral capture of votes. So that is where the thing is going to collapse. Even if the PPP and the other opposition parties agree for an interim government, change the constitution, etc., the talks are going to collapse because the PNC's organic position is that there must be a substantial role for them in the near future, in the distant future. There could only be a substantial role for any political party in a constitution based on elections. In Northern Ireland, in Belgium, in Switzerland, in Fiji, you get into government automatically based on your returns in the election. And based on your returns in the election, that a quota of power is assigned to you. So nobody winning 15% of the votes are going to get 50% of cabinet posts.
Okay.
And York, if I may, I need to jump in here. Freddie, following your thoughts that they don't want to give up, let's talk the scenario that you're using there. Coming back to GCOM. GCOM's chairperson today, this Justice retired Claudette Singh, via her submissions through her lawyer Kim Kite, is saying that the CEO cannot be vested with any unfettered powers, and therefore, if that happens, he is going to be more powerful than the commission, and she's asking the court to therefore throw out this case. Let's assume that she accepts, or there's some scenario that there's a declaration. Are you saying that there is going to be a recognized president in the form of Irfan Ali based on the recount votes, and they are going to have a refusal by the administration? That is the coalition to refuse?
Yes, I think they're going to argue that she could not have made that kind of declaration. And so they're going to say, we want to test that in court. And until that is tested, we will regard the Irfan Ali presidency as illegal.
Well, then following your train of thought again, Freddie, we're going on here. But following your train of thoughts again, where is the army and the police going to stand in all of this?
That is interesting. I don't think we have that kind of professionalism in the police force and in the army that they're going to break ranks with the government of the day. I have to give my opinion. And my opinion is boxed in, for want of a better word. In other words, it's either one or two things. It's either they're going to say, we stand by GCOM, GCOM has made a declaration, and therefore we do not recognize the Granger presidency. Or they say, the reality in the ground is that you have a president who's in power, Mr. Granger, and we are going to stick with that until an alternative situation arises. The army and the police have not been unprofessional in its relation with the civilian government, but these are difficult, trying times. And though I cannot speak with any certainty about the army, I did use the word 3 times in my column about the push. The chairman word meaning a quick lightning takeover of power. I think the day when that guy, say Singh, was ejected, and the deputy assistant commissioner of police refused to eject him, citing professional ethics, and they moved him, it was clear to me that the police are not going to side with against Granger.
Right. And Freddie, there is another issue, isn't there? Let us take the legal perspective, because not only the army will be caught smack down the center, the judiciary will as well. So if the chairman declares an Ali win, an Ali presidency, the chancellor would be constrained, therefore, to follow course and have a swearing in. Therefore, the judiciary now will, who's really going to be president? And it means Granger will have to take command of the armed forces to really rule the country.
I think those two women, those two jurists, have done well for Guyana's image. I think although she voted for 34 being half of 65, I think the Chancellor and the Chief Justice have performed professionally, and their decisions have been learned. My mind is the Chancellor is going to say, I have to follow the law, and GCOM made a declaration, I am going to swear in this guy. What is going to take over there is realpolitik. In any case, she's finished with it. She swears him in, and she's finished with it. She does not have access to power to make him de jure president. He will be de jure president, but she can't make him practical president. So there is a lot of crises ahead. It is clear to my mind that when Granger used those words, that we will accept GCOM declaration, but based on law, what is going to happen is that they're never going to accept a declaration by GCOM, because to stay in power, they have to reject GCOM's declaration, and they are staying in power, so you're going to have a systematic, continuous rejection of anything GCOM does.
Do you believe that?
Go ahead, Leonard.
Sorry, my apologies there, my host. Do you believe that the Chancellor will play ball, will do the right thing? Let's assume that the GCOM goes along with the way of Irfan Ali. There's a declaration, there's a swearing in, or there is an instruction or a notice to the Chancellor to step in there and do her job. Do you believe that she will do her job?
Yes, I just said that. Yes, I think she would.
I think.
And I think she sees that as a ceremonial role. GCOM
Yes.
invites her. She, as the head of the judicial system, for she to reject GCOM.
But Freddie, therein lies as you rightly say, then the nightmare truly starts, because then the judiciary, having the chancellor declare somebody the head of the judiciary, right? Then the judiciary will have to then recognize, not that they would be a part of it, but then the problem gets even real, as to use your word again, that the world will now recognize a sworn-in president, which means Granger would occupy a building, but not an office per se, where the world is concerned.
It depends on the social forces in Guyana. He is going to stay in power, and I think he's in power illegally at the moment, but he's still in power. But it's going to eventually collapse. But I believe the police and the army are going to use excuses to say, this is the situation on the ground, and we're going to stick with the situation on the ground. Now, when those people went to see the army chief, they knew this was coming because they got their intelligence data that these people are not coming out. For all you know, maybe somebody high up in the echelons of the PNC have fed the information back to the U.S. Embassy that, look, we had a meeting and these people are not coming out at all. That's why she went and she met the army chief. What I believe may happen to put Granger and company out of power, what I believe may happen is that I don't think the Americans have spoken to them directly, and I don't think the Americans will say, listen, we are not tolerating this, and we are going to take drastic measures to remove you, and we are going to remove you, and that means physically. The Americans may then give them secretly a couple of weeks or what have you, or a couple of months, so they may ask for that, and then they may leave. I think there is some play yet remaining to stop the nightmare, and I think that's Americans. The Americans will never tolerate one of the most obscure, smallest group in South America and the Caribbean defying them. No, maybe if it's strategic, like Central America, if it's Costa Rica, Chile, even Jamaica, all which Trinidad that lies next to Venezuela. No, they're not going to tolerate Guyana doing that because their credibility is at stake. You're talking about the superpower.
Well, Freddie, are we still obscure with oil?
If we're still obscure with oil, well, I think that oil puts us in a better economic position, but it doesn't make us a strategic geopolitical player in the world. Ecuador has more.
Not necessarily, Freddie. Let me interject here. There's a story that coming out today.
Hold a minute. Before we get to the oil, let's just stretch this thing a little bit further. So, Freddie, I want to take you back to what you said just now, and that is the likelihood that all the indications are showing that this is what they plan to do. Sir, today's Guyana Rag front page said, "We will not bend." That is, Harmon is speaking, "We will not bend." Going back to your point then, Mr. Kissoon, will you, with your analytical mind, connect the dots backwards to say that this thing has long been in the play with Granger putting retired army persons in strategic positions all around the country?
Well, I've said it on television, radio, and in my column several times. They thought that in 2015 there would have been a mesmerizing, electrifying, coruscating victory. And then when the return came in and they saw that they barely won, and maybe they didn't win, from 2015 onwards, they started the directions, mechanisms, strategies, stratagems to reenact Burnhamism, where Burnham's philosophical approach to power, which is once you have it, you have to use it and use it for the utility of your constituency. This thing was there since 2015, and I think what went wrong is they did not have the intellectual finesse and the strategic genius of Burnham. You may not like a leader, but you have to give him credit. Now, take, for example, Jagdeo. I personally think Mr. Jagdeo is not a democratic guy with democratic instincts. Maybe it will change. But Jagdeo has a strategic finesse. He is very, very articulate in persuading people, and he is very cunning and foxy in strategizing, with the results that he out-strategize his opponents. And that is where he's at today. He has lost 2 consecutive elections, and his cunning and his strategic thinking have brought him back into power. So you may not like a person, but you have to give them credit if they possess a talent that is there. And I think Burnham was definitely a dangerously autocratic man. But Burnham had finesse. He knew how to strategize. In the middle of an ethnic crisis in Guyana, he invited Stokely Carmichael. He got an Indian legal doctor to draft his constitution. He took a lawyer married to a white woman to be his foreign minister and his attorney general, etc. Now, the people in power today in the PNC, when they sat down in 2015 to reenact Burnhamism, you can't reenact Brian Lara or reenact Don Bradman if the person isn't a genius as Lara or as Bradman. You have to take a genius like Lara and you have the enactment of Brian Lara. Now, how could you take someone as Jejune, as Bainal, as Harmon, Waldo Lawrence, David Granger, and a few others and say, listen, we're going to do what Forbes did in the 70s and 80s. You can't. And that is the problem I think they're in today.
And Freddie, while this is not of ultimate importance, but the positioning and the sound bites, of course, would have its own import. That is, Harmon today purportedly addressed the nation. Here is a chairman of a political party addressing a nation, yet the man who holds the constitutional position of president of this country has not done so.
Well, I don't think it's any big disagreement. I think Granger has been sidestepped, not in any confrontational way. They're in the war room, and they would say, David, you leave this to me. David, you don't get involved in this. So in that sense, Granger is not totally in charge. But I think what they're trying to do, what Harmon is trying to do, and this is old strategy that goes back to the Roman Empire, very old strategy. It was best exemplified in Hamilton Green in the PNC and Janet Jagan in the PPP. What Cheddy Jagan and Burnham did, they made very, very unpopular decisions. They castigated people wrongfully, but they didn't do it. It's Green that did it. And so we say Green is a bully. It's not Cheddy that did it. It's Janet that did it. So we say Janet is a Stalinist and Chetty remains as the nice guy. So all Harmon is doing is protecting this so-called nice image of Granger. Granger doesn't come across when speaking as a James Bond or as a Sherwood Duncan or as Kemmer Ramjatan. I mean, a really wild politician, very wild man is Kemmer Ramjatan. But Granger doesn't sound like that. So they want to keep that image. Now, you got to understand, the more the PNC brutalizes the Queen's language, the more they brutalize vocabularies of the English language, the more they sung as bestial politicians. Granger is protected because it's not he that's coming across as a Harmon or a James Bond. Now, I think that explains why Harmon, dictators, all of them, they put a fall guy.
Yes, indeed. And Freddie, to come back to the point you were making, Leonard, Freddie, the oil issue, I would want viewers and listeners to remember and to realize this, and for your comment, of course. When we talk about oil, ladies and gentlemen, we are talking about contracts with powerful firms that Guyana's economy pales in significance to them. And, Guyana tried for how much years? 30 years now to break a contract with an American telephone company, could not have done it. So whatever and whether Guyana's political problems, the people are going to continue to pump their oil and probably keep their money until there is a legitimate government. Over to you, Freddie.
I could understand what Leonard was saying, that now there's a newly oil-rich country, but it doesn't translate. There are oil-rich countries richer than Guyana and has more leeway in the world economy than Guyana, yet they don't have that kind of insertion in the geopolitics and the strategic shape of the world. Brunei, Ecuador, they're all oil power. So even though Guyana may be a newly found oil power, it still doesn't and will not have that kind of importance to make countries, powerful countries like the EU and the US, turn a blind eye to their oligarchic bestialities, as what's going on in Guyana. But it's not so much Guyana's importance that is at stake here. It's the credibility of the United States. And I don't think the PNC ignoramuses are seeing this. Look, in psychological politics, I lived in Grenada, I've seen this, and I think both of you, Leonard and you, would know this. Once you make a decision as a CEO, as an army boss, as a president or a prime minister, once you take a definitive stand and you have a global clout, you box yourself in if you don't pursue what you said you will do. Now, if the United States does not confront Guyana on its violation of democracy, there are 40 countries in South America and the Caribbean. Which one is going to say, listen, let's try this thing? Now, for all we know, Bautista may have tried it if he didn't look at the relentless pressure coming on in Guyana. Suppose Bautista wanted to try it and he say, listen, look what happened in Guyana. I may not get you with this thing, and for all you know, I am wanted in Holland. I better make a deal with my local people here. So he made a deal. He made a deal in that he agreed to a free and fair election. He handed over power, and I don't think they are going to extradite him. So the United States and the EU are not going to allow a small, obscure country that they have pronounced is a rigor of election. They're not going to turn back like that. Your credibility is at stake. Now, take, for example, Mark Rubio. He is a senator in Florida. His office takes in Latin America and Caribbean affairs. Who is going to listen to Mark Rubio from other Central and Latin American countries? When this guy said Mr. Granger lost election, he should step aside. And Mark Rubio just forget about it, and the dictatorship in Guyana remains. The thing is too far gone for the United States, for CARICOM and the EU to back down. But more importantly, once Granger is allowed to stay in CARICOM, some other CARICOM country is going to rig the election, bash up the country, and CARICOM can't say anything. And then in the next 5 years, another CARICOM country is going to say, Guyana do it, Xanadu country do it, let's do it. And you're talking about the demise of CARICOM. No. When all the configurations, permutations, directions are taken into consideration, I think Granger has lost, the PNC, the AFU have lost, and it's only a question of time.
And Freddie, I want to stretch you back a little bit. Now, back to the argument, on the option that if Granger decides, well, the likelihood is he would stay in office regardless of how this goes. The chancellor would then swear in Ali. The army is caught in a quandary. But one of our viewers just sent in this word. If the chancellor swears in Ali, Ali immediately becomes the commander-in-chief, and therefore the army would be, under usual circumstances, be constrained to follow the word of the commander-in-chief. Over to you, sir.
Well, in political theory, you have de jure power and de facto power.
Yeah.
Once they swear in Ali, he is de jure president.
Right.
But then you have the concept of realpolitik, practical politics. If you swear in Ali and he is the de jure president, you have an illegal president that still commands raw power, which the army concedes is the power that they're going to abide by. Then I think what you have is a continuation of an illegal regime. What happens then is what we can debate. But there's no question that if the army and the police do not recognize de jure power, then Granger remains in office with his outriders and with his public sector chiefs in the public sector, and the army and police chief taking directions from him.
And by then we have no economy. Who's going to pay? I mean, that's not for this discussion, but just for the viewers and listeners. Freddie, if I may step aside from the politics for a moment, just to bring our viewers and listeners up to date. Ladies and gentlemen, yesterday, July 16th, would have been a sad anniversary of the shooting to death of those two boys in Berbice, Mr. Jagan Ramasar and Bolanat Parmanand, for the 1973 elections, which you would recall, and this is why I raised this to seek Freddie's input once again on this. A week ago, Granger's page would have laid that at the feet of Carl Morgan, which I think the entire nation was taken by shock that a sitting president would have on his Facebook page, Freddie, such a statement that Carl Morgan would have been the administrative officer in charge when those two boys were shot. And today, of course, I believe is the anniversary of the Michael Ford bombing that would have taken place. Over to you, Freddie.
I think we need, when this matter is settled, I think we need to do some serious research into Granger's background during the 70s. I am not convinced that Granger and Harmon knew nothing about the Walter Rodney assassination. Harmon was the chief of intelligence, and Harmon had to know what was going on. He had to know because the army was intricately involved in the plot. What I think is shameless on the part of the PPP. I don't know if the next government is the PPP, and I would hope we have a road to Damascus scenario here, where the PPP would have seen that they messed up very, very badly, immorally, and in degenerate ways. That Walter Rodney Commission of Inquiry, the report points a finger of the involvement to kill Walter Rodney by a certain man who is very, very, a certain high-level military guy who is very, very close to the PPP. Now, I believe that guy, I don't want to call his name. The problem is I could call his name because the Commission of Inquiry report is online. But Yog, who is to stop him from suing Kaieteur Radio and me tomorrow? And I got to climb the court steps. So those who want to know his name, please go online, punch in Walter Rodney Commission, and you will see what they have to say about him and Skip Roberts. So I have no doubt in my mind that Joe Harmon would not have been a non-interested party during those events. Now, what is interesting to note is that recently, actually the 12th of June, which is just a month ago, Walter Rodney's daughter managed to secure 20 before then classified documents from the U.S. government on the Rodney assassination. And in one of those documents, Burnham is speaking frankly, quite frankly, to the U.S. ambassador. Now, the things Burnham said to that ambassador, when you read what he said to the ambassador, the army people had to know, because Burnham was saying things that he knew Rodney was doing, and the army people had to know. So I am not surprised at what Granger did. I don't have a Facebook account, what Granger did in terms of Morgan, but I would think that Granger in the 70s was not such an innocent bystander that Guyana's historiography is claiming him to be. I think we need to do much more research on that guy, because his obsession with Forbes Burnham and the role he played as the ideological educator for the army. I mean, he was actually in charge of the education classes, the political classes, not education classes, political classes for the army. It would have brought him very close to Burnham. So my point is, I am not surprised at the Carl Morgan embrace.
Right, and I'm sorry, Leonard, my last one and then over to you. And the Josing, he is hit out quite harshly, sharply and repeatedly at Josing. He took absolute umbrage to Josing using the terms unleashing the dogs of war. The reason I asked you that, Freddie, is as of today, we have seen some, I believe, is ominous statements. I don't know what you would think, sir, coming out from certain persons. So, for example, on Ronald Austin Jr.'s page, he has shared what is purportedly a letter from Vincent Alexander, Commissioner Vincent Alexander. The last sentence of that letter reads as follows: "But regime change was achieved, thousands killed, and Iraq is yet to return to stability and civility." For me, Freddie, that is a little chilling statement coming from a commissioner. But over to you, sir.
Well, you're on Facebook, so you read that. I think David Hines is saying much more explicitly. That is couched in innuendos and insinuations. But David Hines is much more forthright by saying the population isn't going to accept that, you're going to have trouble, etc. It could be two things, Yog. It could be the Burnham trait of, if I fall, then this place, could be in a mess. It could be that if there is regime change, they are going to use street violence to push them to the bargaining table. So if they feel that way, then sadly and pessimistically, I hope your viewers don't start being sad. There is going to be street violence, because if it's a modus operandi to gain you a seat at the negotiating table, then in terms of real politics, they're going to use it. Secondly, it could also be sounding off in this violent way to scare the PPP, to scare other stakeholders like the business people, because once you have street violence, the business people stand to lose. I am not too sure the street violence of the 70s and 80s with the PNC goons and the House of Israel. I am not too sure it's going to work that way. I think there's going to be collateral damage, mutual collateral damage, or there's going to be collateral damage on both sides. Whereas from 1962 to 1997, there was collateral damage on only one side. And they are thinking that they're invincible and that they could pull off from 1962 to 1997 again. No, it's different. The world has changed beyond recognition from 1962, 1964, 1997. No. I think the PNC has the capacity to create unnerving moments, but to dominate Guyana with relentless violence, without collateral damage to themselves, I can't see it happening without collateral damage being done to the PNC. This is a different world, and there are people out there with enormous resources that a super calculator cannot even calculate their resources.
Yes, and thank you very much for that. Freddie, the people that are online that is watching the show and listening, they said that you have a Facebook account, but you're trying to say that you don't have one. But in any case, it has a name on it.
I have never denied anything that I do in life. And the reason for that is I would like to know who can get me. Mm-hmm. Who can get me to hide what I believe in?
Right.
If I believe Brian Lara is a fool, if I believe Obama is a fool, I am going to say that and put my name. So maybe, but you weren't thinking the other way. Maybe some fan of mine.
Right, you have a fan. You have a fan.
For me.
Right. I think you should investigate it, but I think you should also get yourself a smartphone.
Well, can't you do that for me? I got a smartphone.
You have a smartphone?
Lolo sent me a smartphone. When I opened it up, the wires were rigged, and it had a phallic symbol. It came from Lolo.
All right, I'm not going to continue with this conversation anymore. But Freddie, there's a development. Freddie, there's a development today. Freddie, I think you have a fake account. Yes, I have a white pants. You like it?
Red, R-E-D red.
Yes, I do. Freddie, there's a development today that Guyana, one day after it was announced that several persons within the coalition were slapped with visa revocations, and we have a new term now, by the way, visa revokees, I think it is. I hope Yog is not a revokee, but one day after that would have happened, there's news coming out from Gordon Mosley's news source, and this is what it had to say. The Guyana government has refused a request by the United States.
Oh, I heard about that.
Right. That
is not possible. If you're going to have that kind of thing, it'd be better to put.
Well, let the people know what it is. If you missed it, there is reportedly a request by the U.S. They have written to our Washington embassy and to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs here for Guyana to be used, spectrums and so on, to transmit the Voice of America radio signals there. And the Guyana government has refused, stating that they don't want to do anything that is going to, destabilize the situation with Venezuela.
But Leonard, just Freddie comes in. Freddie, just one thing I want to add there before your comment. So the request would have been dated April this year. The communication from the ministry and so forth is April this year. But this rigging of this election is March this year. And the U.S. ambassador and everybody would have been on record since early March. And so the narrative they're trying to push that is because they told the U.S. no, that the U.S. is now doing all of this. Over to you, back.
Well, analysts, if they respect their education, the first thing they do, they look at who is bringing this information out. And when it's Gordon Mosley, you see, I regard people like Mosley, Lincoln Lewis, Henry Jeffrey, I regard them as the surrogates who are doing the nefarious work for Granger and company. So instead of Granger saying this, they are going to say it for him. But I think one of the problems human beings have is to know when to engage in a polemic and who to engage it with. I am not going to comment on some masturbation by Gordon Mosley. I don't consider him, I consider him one of the cheap propagandists in situations like this. And you are going to have every scenario like this. The past couple hundred of years have produced cheap propagandists like Gordon Mosley. So if we can get on with analyzing more important people who are doing the work for the PNC, I would prefer to go in that direction.
No, well, I was just asking about the timing of it, whether, well, if you don't want to discuss that, that's okay. Well, then we bring you to another angle here. Selwyn Peters, attorney at law, who would have played a role in the Walter Rodney COI.
Yeah, I know him personally.
Very good. I didn't ask you that, sir. But he said in room 592 that APNU would not risk the existence as a coalition by exposing that very detailed report. I want to ask your thoughts on that, sir.
Let me get that again.
Okay, Selwyn Peters, he would have played a role in the Walter Rodney COI, and he would have expressed his thoughts, stating in room 592 here that the APNU coalition did not, he believed that they would not have wanted that report to come out because of what it would have exposed. Your thoughts?
Well, the report is out. Whether they would not have wanted it to come out is another thing. But he's right, because they stake the claim. They believe, I think Lincoln Lewis' wife, who writes letters under the name of Minute Backus, she said, look, let the commission, she's one of the strongest fanatical PNC that since in the history of the PNC. She said, let the commission go ahead because it's going to exonerate Burnham. And they believe that 30 years plus, there would have been obfuscations and esoteric discussions, and nothing would have come out of it. But the evidence pointed to Burnham involvement, and I think it is quite sad that someone of the caliber and importance of someone like Jerry Gavaya, you know, one of the things, let me divest here. I got a call from Kit Nascimento this morning, and he asked me for the documents that were released by Walter Rodney's daughter. I think the difference with Kit Nascimento and someone like Jerry Gavaya. Now, I was in Kaieteur Radio for 2 weeks interviewing Jerry Gavaya, and I think Mr. Gavaya has played no small part. Mr. Gavaya has played an essential, emphatic, priceless role in stopping rigged election. I think that will go down in the textbook. But the difference with Gavaya and Kit Nascimento said, look, I was with these people. I know what these people have done. I have seen these people rig elections. I think Jerry Gavaya needs to put to rest for the next generation and for young people like yourself, Leonard, as to what happened with the Rodney's assassination and the man who killed Rodney, Gregory Smith. I think Jerry has done sufficient to redeem himself. And I do believe as a captain in the army, he was told orders to fly someone out, and he did that. He couldn't tell Bonham, I'm not flying the man. But he owes it to history. He owes it to young people like you, Gildarie, and the young intellectuals that are coming up to say, listen, this is what I know of the Rodney assassination. Now, this is what I believe. I believe Jerry flew out Gregory Smith. And Jerry said in the Commission of Inquiry he didn't know who he was flying. That is not true. There is a very, very important person in the AFC. That person was a trainee engineer that was cleaning the aircraft and fixing the aircraft up when Jerry and Gregory Smith were talking. Now, I have a lot of respect for Jerry, so I can say this: I don't think he would sue me. And saying that he knows it was Gregory Smith doesn't mean that I'm libeling him. And I hope if he's listening, I don't mean any harm. I've spoken positively of him, and I don't intend to denigrate him. I would not. The Jerry Guevara of 2020 has taken his place as a Democrat. But to get back to Selwyn Peters, yes, I don't think they wanted that to come out. But I'm glad you raised the topic, Gildarie, because in discussing Rodney, there are implications of the moral and psychic contortions of this society, which perhaps have no parallel in the 21st century. To think that Rupert Roopnarine voted in Parliament not to release that report. So the Rodney Commission of Inquiry not only exposed Burnham's role in it and exposed Granger not wanting to the report, but it also shows But I think I think as Yog was talking about Joe Singh and how they reacted to Joe Singh. David Granger does not like Joe Singh because Joe Singh was appointed above him. But David Granger doesn't like Rupert Roopnarine, and that's why I find Rupert Roopnarine's position extremely weird in a negative sense. Because I think Granger doesn't like the WPA because Granger and Harmon knew what the WPA were doing in the 70s. He was head of military intelligence. So I wasn't surprised when Granger mistreated Rupert Roopnarine. First, he made him Minister of Natural Resources. He was photographed with his long boots visiting a collapsed mining pit in which 11 miners died. And then suddenly became Minister of Education. Then he was unceremoniously dumped as Minister of Education and given a portfolio in the Public Service Ministry. He didn't have a desk or a chair. He worked at home. So the Rodney Commission of Inquiry has brought out a lot of things that just show how tragic this country is.
Yep, indeed. Freddie, if we come back to these elections, because undeniably, fortunately or maybe fortunately for them, unfortunately for the country, the APNO AFC, in whatever they're doing, they have held on strongly. A bunch of very old men, especially the president, he's not anywhere in his prime anymore, but they have held on strongly to some younger men that has been spewing quite some dangerous rhetoric every day. And so going back to what you theorized at the top of the program, that a Granger government will not give up this presidency, the likelihood is that time will overtake Mr. Granger sooner or later. And what then if they continue to want to stay in power?
Well, tragically and sadly, I think we're witnessing the demise of the PNC. What, my goodness, I don't know why we keep coming back to the comparison of Burnham and Granger. Mr. Burnham rigged elections glaringly, egregiously, barefacedly. But once he was in power, he did things that obfuscated his naked proclivities of hogging power. That he got Cheddi Jagan in 1976 to declare critical support. Then he got Cheddi Jagan in 1984 to have talks of power sharing. So Burnham survived because he was a thinker. I also do not believe Burnham was stupid enough to carry the fight against Indians. Once Jagan was there, Indians would not have embraced Burnham. But there were certain things that Burnham did that if he was not such obsessed with himself, he could have gained Indian support. I think the MMA, that MMA thing was very good for rural farmers. The Ibini Ranch thing, the cattle thing. But the thing with Granger is that he is so mediocre and the people around him that what you are facing here with now is the eventual collapse of the PNC. Now, here is what I think is going to be the shape of post-2020 Guyana. One, Granger is going to resign. Two, the people likely to succeed him is not going to have any kind of respect from the business community, from the intellectual class, and from the African middle class. The people that is going to rally around that leader are people themselves that will be detested by the society. The James Bond, those kinds of people. The AFC will be gone. That's fairly obvious. The AFC will be gone. So why the stakes are so high, why they are so pathologically aggressive, because unlike Mahadeo in 2011 and unlike Mahadeo in 2015, they knew, Mahadeo and the PPP knew that the PPP was going to be alive in 2020 and fighting like hell to regain its position. And in fact, Mahadeo did regain its position. What position is the PNC hierarchy going to regain? Secondly, that little oil wealth is going to bring in money that you can use to win over constituencies. Now, I believe people like Juan Edghill, Philip Hamilton, the Prime Minister, those guys are going to be given leverage to do things for the African Guyanese community. Now, here is the difference. Burnham and Jagan used to buy Indians and Africans respectively in their government, and people never really supported them because the blacks felt that that was Jagan buying over Stooge. The Indians felt that was Burnham buying over Stooge. I think this time it's going to be different. This time you're going to have an exhausted African constituency. You're going to have a dying PNC. And I think African Guyanese are going to look to salvage their future. And they're probably going to deal with Mark Phillips. And if Mark Phillips is astute enough, he should reach out to them in genuine ways. And I believe that is going to happen. I don't know Mahadeo. I don't know his temperament. He may be a recalcitrant man, but not Aninandalal. Not, I think, I do acknowledge that Irfan Ali has done well. He will be the next president of Guyana. He has a PhD from UWI. His supervisor was a professor of Padai. But I cannot bring myself to think that the next president from the PPP would not be Aninandalal. I mean, but it's gone. He's not going to be the president. But I think Nandalal has a more sobering effect on PPP's politics. He's the kind of guy who reaches out more. I can see the same for some of the young players Leonard, Gildarie would know them. They were in the studio with us. They're pretty young people who are going to be given position. Take, for example, Sanjeev Dattadin. I can see Sanjeev Dattadin just being a yes man for Jagdeo and just saying, this is Indian people time. That's not the Sanjeev Dattadin I know. So you're really facing, this country is really facing the demise of the PNC because they have, Greenwich is gone, but even if Greenwich stays, I don't think Greenwich is any charismatic visionary leader. When you look at the PNC, who do you have? If you look at the new movement, if you look at Anug, there are far greater potential there, both in terms of vision and intellectual strength. And you don't see that in the PNC. But finally, more importantly, what the PNC has done to this country the past 4 months, there's going to be indefatigable, inflexible anger that is going to last a very long time. And that is going to be to the detriment of those young people aren't going to forget what they did. Because what they did exceeded what Burnham did. Exceeded far. I mean, we're into the 4th month and people just feel Georgetown is going to be burned down because the PNC think they have a right to rule Guyana forever. When you think of that, how could you forgive such a party in another year or two? So I would like to think that the most painful tragedy when this crisis is over is that a historic party like the PNC may not survive.
And that is a sad thing because, Freddie, what happens to a strong opposition? Because one would remember the pre-2015 things that, a lot of persons were opposed to, and without a strong opposition, we can very well quickly end up there again.
Well, that is the problem the 4-month crisis has produced. Even with a strong opposition, if the PP is going to be kept in check, it will have to be done by that one solitary parliamentarian because given the mental state of this society with what's been going on, the PNC is going to lose the potency of the word. They're going to lose the power of the pen because they're going to be judged by 4 months of the Faustian journey into dark subterranean monsters that ate us up. That is how people are going to judge them. It's going to take a cataclysmic, volcanic implosion by the PNC in which degeneracy will not be the right word to use, for the PNC to resurrect themselves and outdo the PPP as an opposition party. And I don't think with all his bad behavior, I don't think Jagdeo is going to be that recidivist. And I don't think the young people in the party are going to allow him to just run amok. I can't see Sanjeev Dattadin, Mark Phillips, and Anil just allowing Jagdeo to do what I think he may dominate Anil, but he may not dominate the cabinet or the government. So you have a problem there with them even being in the opposition. Look, whoever succeeds Granger, it's going to be one of 3 persons. I think in terms of delegates voting, it's either going to be Valda Lawrence, Basil Williams, or Harmon. You could imagine one of those 3 persons commanding respect in the National Assembly and commanding respect in the diplomatic community and among the young intellectual class.
That's true. And Freddie, would you, what's your thoughts? 2 of those 3 names are purportedly dual citizens. They have said that they would have tendered their withdrawal, but it never was proven to GCOM or anybody.
who are the three? Who are the two? I only know of Lil Joe Shiling.
Oh my goodness.
I don't Valda Lawrence, a dual citizen.
Well, there are suspicions.
You see, you could get away with that because under U.S. privacy law, you can't. But I think there are very smart lawyers in the U.S. that can tell. It is possible that the PPP is not interested in paying high price consultants to find out who is a citizen, because maybe they feel they got their own skeletons in the cupboard too. Don't trust the PPP. They may have people right there in the midst that are dual citizens. One of the things we keep forgetting, and I would like to emphasize, what happened on March the 2nd concerns the future of this country and concerns your spouses and your children. Both of you are on this radio program. It was our country. I've been fighting to get free and fair elections since March the 2nd. I think Leonard Gildarie and Mahadeo doing the same for this country we're going to live in. Unfortunately, some people see it as PPP versus PNC. I don't see it as such. So it's not about the PPP. It's about our country. But one has to be reminded that the PPP was no good guy. I think we have to have free and fair election. A bad man in Hungary won it. A bad man in the Philippines won it. A bad man in Poland won it. A bad man in the United States won it. A disheartening character in the UK won it. But they fought the election and won. Who is there in the world to tell them, oh God, we will show the man in Poland? Look what that crazy guy doing in Brazil and in the Philippines. But how could you get the army to overthrow them, the army take power, and you don't have free and fair election anymore? What you have to do is fight them. And the Brazilians are fighting Bolsonaro. I don't think his presidency is going to last the 5 years. So let us have a free and fair election, and if Jagdeo win again, we will have to confront him if he go the wrong way. And that is what democratic societies do. I never saw this thing, and I doubt whether the two of you ever saw it, as PNC versus PPP. That is what people like Lincoln Lewis and Jagdeo saw it. They saw it as Indian versus Africans. I saw it as Guyanese versus the bandits in the PNC, the AFC. And before you come in again, I'd like you guys to know, since these programs are being recorded, I'd like it to be stated in years from now that I think they're equal bandits in the AFC as they are in the PNC at the moment.
Thank you for that. And Freddie, I want to come a full circle here. Now, I mentioned to you, quoted to you what Vincent Alexander, part of his letter that was released today. In response, says Gunraj has released, and says Gunraj has said, what my colleague has deliberately ignored, but in fact appears to countenance, is the insidious fraud perpetrated by Clearman Mingo, and he advocates the use of declarations based upon the same. If you could focus a little bit on the commission itself, Freddie, from the following perspective as well. We know Vincent Alexander has been here for many, many, many years. But we also know that Mr. Corbyn, one of the commissioners, has overseas interest from his own personal standpoint. So how does that leave with this threat of sanctions? And would a Corbyn not want to look at what sanctions could mean to him if he's a green card holder?
Well, he may be. Well, you have to understand groupthink in Guyanese politics and loyalty. There are times when people forsake their resources because of coercive demands from loyalty by the upper echelons. The examples of that are numerous in the Nazi regime of Hitler. Hitler was extracting loyalty from people, to the detriment of their own family and their own businesses. The one man who didn't accept that was Rudolf Hess, and he took a plane, flew to Scotland, and tried to end the war. Now, by the way, just as an aside, when we're in the radio station, I just felt I wanted to say this just to cool the temperature down. When we were in the radio station with Leonard Gildarie, the guy that is known as Critic, he mistakenly thought that Germany won the Second World War. I hope he doesn't object to me bringing in that. But yes, Rudolf Hess just didn't felt that his interests should come below Hitler. So Corbyn may be taking instructions from his brother saying, listen, this is time to hold the fort. I want to get into analysis here to explain why Corbyn may look at loyalty in place of his business interests and what is happening with these elections. I think there's a theoretical aspect to what is going on the past 4 months that we need to discuss. And I feel guilty as an academic coming on these programs and not talking about it. I believe there's a genuine fear in people like Vincent Alexander, David Hines, the PNC, people like Raphael Chotman, Cathy Hughes, that this election marks the end of African entitlement. I do believe on a using strict economic terminologies, economic and financial terminologies. I think African people are disadvantaged in this country. How you go about that is through policy making. Burnham went about it by Land to the Tiller Act and Acquisition of Land Act, in which he forcefully took people land, as you can see now, where the land outside of UG there at the traffic lights. I believe there is a case for African entitlement. I believe there's a genuine fear that when the PPP comes back, that is how they feel. And I think it really exists in their mind, that when the PPP come back, Argonne Lake. Now, Gildarie would know what Argonne Lake means. I think you a bit old, you may know that. That's a famous statement in Guyanese history when the hotel wasn't supposed to be burned down, but it burned down, and the people burned it down say Argonne Lake. So they feel Argonne. That may be a theoretical validity, and that may be a sociological pronouncement that has to be made at the negotiating table. But that is no substitute for wanting permanent PNC rule, because permanent PNC rule involves monstrous and horrible consequences. Let's take the Declaration of Sophia in 1976. I can't imagine anything more morbid masturbation as what Burnham did at the Sophia PNC headquarters in 1976 as his Congress place. Burnham could not win a free and fair election. Burnham's constituency was 35% of the population. And that man announced to Guyana and the world that his party that represents 35% will now be the paramount institution over law, over other social institutions, over other political institutions in Guyana. Do you know what happened? What would have happened on March the 4th if Mingo's masturbation like Burnham had taken hold? With 29% of the population, you would have had a party that caters for 29% of the population, running this country for the next 600 years. Your grandchildren and my grandchildren would only know about one party, the PNC party, which is what happened to the babies that were born after 1968. By 1988, when you had Desmond Hoyt, those 20-year-old kids only know about the PNC. So, even if there's a case for ethnic distribution of resources, it has nothing to do with rigged elections, and that is something to put on the agenda with whichever government comes to power. Let us talk about ethnic redistribution. Let us look at the police force because Indians are insecure. Let us look at land holding and what Africans have. But you cannot say that Africans will be disenfranchised. So let us take hold of the country permanently. And that is what Mingo and Lowenfield and the PNC and AFC were going to do on March the 4th. So in the next 5 years, you would have Lowenfield still there. You would have Myers still there. The election would have been rigged in more surreptitious circumstances. And that takes us to 2025. 2030, Lowenfield is going to be 75. Myers is going to be in the 60s, and they're doing the same thing. That is what Harold Burroughs and Forbes Burnham did in 1968, and that is why this election is so crucial to the physical and psychological existence of every human in this country. Every one of us. Yog has children, Gildarie has children, and when you guys are taking out your sandwich from your rucksack and sitting in the corridor of UG doing your degrees, all you can hear about, oh, the PNC minister opened this factory in Linden. And then you said to yourself, this is the same minister when I was a baby had to open a factory in Suzdijk. No, this election is not about African and Indian entitlement. This this election is about philosophical freedom to exist. That is what it is about. So Alexander and the rest of people like David Hines have to allow a free and fair election and then go to the table and put on the table the genuine grievances of African Guyanese. But what David Hines did more than anybody else, except James Bond, is say either you have a PNC victory or this it.
Right, and indeed that is the new thing being posted now. One of the prime persons that has no moral compass anymore has posted that it's either the country or a war, it's country or nothing. And that's the new thing. Freddie, we are running out of time.
No, somebody
we are
said
getting
that on
to the
Facebook.
stage. Sorry?
Somebody said that on Facebook.
Yes, and we are running unfortunately out of time, my friend.
Facebook is perfect. You should name him.
I'll send it to you. Let me find the quote and I'll send it to you.
No, don't send it to me. If you can say that on Facebook, it's public because you know it. Tell people it. Tell people who his name is.
Let me verify my sources first. But ladies and gentlemen, we are coming down to program time. And Freddie, I'm sorry. We are coming out to program time. We have to bring an end because there's other programs to follow. The court case is not ending on Sunday as we previously thought. It's gone over to Monday, and so we're going to move our program away from Sunday as well so that you can have a good weekend. Hopefully everybody can have a very restful weekend. And, certainly we're looking forward for Mr. Kissoon. Can I invite you from now for a next Friday night discussion again in room 592 here?
By that time, Leonard, Gildarie may come to my home, as he said he will with his smartphone. I will throw it in the trench that the PPP refused to clean by my house there.
Yes, I remember that story.
What an incorrigible man.
Leonard, please get it done by next Friday.
I don't want Leonard Gildarie to my house with a smartphone. We seem to be doing quite well. But in any case, he's going to ask Leonard to buy it and he's going to bring it. But putting fun aside, no, I'm quite happy to be doing this. I think that is our obligation. As we said before, this never happened in Guyana, and all of us now have to stand up and be counted. So I'm quite happy. Just call me. Just call me.
Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you also very much for joining us here in room 592. And do have a great weekend. And as I usually remind you every night, please do a prayer for this country. It is still the best country in the world. And let us all remember, where there is intolerance and hate, let us be tolerant and let us ensure that in our own hearts and minds and practice there is no racism or hate for each other. Ladies and gentlemen, have a great weekend ahead. To you two, my co-hosts, and to the Kaieteur Radio technical crew, Kevin, Rad, Josh, and everybody there, have a great weekend. Do have a safe, great weekend, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Freddie Kissoon, to you and your family, a warm and good weekend to you, sir. To my beautiful wife, Anita, Arya, Yoga, and all of you, great weekend. Bye-bye now, everyone. Be safe.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
COVID-19 tips sponsored by Dex Soap. 1. Practice social distancing. 2. Wear your mask when leaving the house. 3. Wash your hands regularly for 20 seconds using our Dex Soap. 4. Cover your nose and mouth with a disposable tissue or flex elbow when you cough or sneeze. Choose Dex Soap for that extra cleanliness. Dex Soap is affordable and available nationwide.
Kaieteur Radio, the radio with a difference.
99.1 FM.
Selector Chino.